Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on complex site grading streamlined. I'm Maria Laxamana, and joining me today is one of our many technical consultants with SolidCAD, Colin Gade. The topic for today will be focused on site grading. We've seen how complex and hours spent on redundant tasks takes away on your actual design work. Using Civil 3D native feature line is time-consuming and non-dynamic. Well, with AutoGrader, we will witness an efficient, faster way to automate feature line gradings and finish grade surface creation. By defining parent feature lines such as gutter lines, pond types, pond tops, or even right-of-way lines in subdivisions, AutoGrader allows you to create grading families to generate and update the subsequent child feature lines. When you make changes to your parent, with just a click, AutoGrader will automatically update child lines in a matter of seconds. But first, here's our agenda. We'll introduce SolidCAD to those that are new joining us today. Then we'll have Colin demonstrate the workflow and better practices for grading your site plan project. We'll conclude at the end with a Q&A session. And SolidCAD has been your authorized Canadian reseller of Autodesk products for well over 25 years, holding a platinum status, the highest bestowed upon a company. We merged with Cancel back in 2017, forming one nationwide operation and branded as SolidCAD, a Cancel company. As one, we continued in helping our clients with workflow and product solutions to keep them well ahead of the latest technological advancements. We specialize in industries in architecture, engineering, construction, civil infrastructure, manufacturing, and plant. Our training facilities and offices are located across the country. We have a dedicated technical support team on standby, ready to assist you at any given moment in all time zones. For the past year now, our clients needed support even more so during these unprecedented times. Albeit remotely, we have succeeded by continuing providing our services through consultation, training, and implementation, just to name a few. Our commitment to you by providing the industry-leading solutions has always been our main goal. We pride ourselves with this belief and practice. Sorry about that. So just reach out to SolidCAD for your needs. We're here to help. With that, I'll hand it over to Colin, my colleague, to get started.
Thanks for that introduction, Ramil. Uh, as we get started here, I'd like to start talking about some of the tools that we have at our disposal when it comes to grading a site or just grading in general. There are a lot to pick from, and it can be anything from simple AutoCAD objects, so polylines or 3D polylines that might be representing contours, up to survey figures and COGO points or survey points that might be coming in through a survey database or that were collected out in the field. And then we also have more of our design components as well, so our corridors, grading tools, and feature lines. Now, today we're going to talk more about the feature lines and a little bit of grading tools in our workflow scenario. Um, but I wanted to mention all of the different types of grading objects because there's some that may end up being better for different scenarios. But at any time when we're looking at a grading scenario and we're looking at all of our options that we could grade it with, we want to make sure that we're making something that is flexible. When we're creating grading, you're going to run into the scenario of having to run through iterations of that grading. So we want to identify the roadblocks that are going to happen in our grading scenarios, and we want to identify those quickly. So we want something that's going to be not only flexible, but also an efficient tool to get us to that point in grading where we can identify a little bit faster some of the roadblocks where we're going to have to alter our original plan. And To note on top of this as well, as we get into grading, there's going to be a lot of components meshing together, and every single one of those components is going to have a purpose in your site plan or in your grading design. So we should be naming them as such. We want to make sure that anyone else could jump into our design and understand what was going on with the use of correct naming conventions and the description area that you're going to see in some of those 3D objects, so that someone else can just jump in and run with the design that you've started out. Keeping things organized is a cornerstone important thing to do when it comes to our grading designs, because they can get very cluttered. Um, as we're talking about feature lines, we're going to identify a couple different tools in the ribbon that we're going to explore with the quick elevation editor and some of the other key tools that you can use from the ribbon. We're also going to look at AutoGrader. AutoGrader is a third-party software from CTC that allows us to manipulate these feature lines in such a more efficient manner. It's not creating any proprietary feature lines. It's giving us this control to do this stepped offset command, but in a much more intricate way. We can do multiple stepped offsets at the same time off of multiple baselines. It's very, very efficient. Um, as we're starting out any grading scenario though, the very first thing we need to do is start establishing some rough grades. And this is the first grading concept that I want to talk about, is this grading concept of temporary or a setup surface. So we'll flip here, and the way to create a setup surface is very rough grades. We want to plan out how our site is going to drain. Picturing a water droplet, as I'm sure you've heard before, where does that water droplet end up? Well, we can use rough grades with the use of simple grading tools or feature lines to create rough flow paths for those water droplets as they hit on different areas of the site. This is much more efficient because we can direct the water through very simple and easy to understand rough setup surfaces, and then apply that to our more complex back of curb scenarios and things like that. So this is what I'd like to do, and then we'll look at how we can incorporate AutoGrader into finishing up that design. So we'll flip over into Civil 3D, and we're going to take a look at this little grading site scenario right here. Now, we have an existing surface, and then I've got the shell of two other surfaces. And what I'd like to do first is establish some grades around the outer perimeter for this gutter line. I don't have any grades yet, so I could absolutely jump into Elevation Editor and start trying to manipulate things. That's going to be very time consuming. Remember, we want efficiency. We want to get to that roadblock as fast as possible so then we can identify the solutions for it. So let's get our rough grades as fast as possible using a setup surface. Down here, I've just got a simple feature line, and I've established some rough grades off of the existing surface. Now, what we're going to do from that is use the grading tools to actually create a rough grading plane or a rough parking plane that we can then establish elevations off of. Now, anytime you're doing this and opening up the grading tools, you want to work from left to right. So establish the site that we're going to be grading in and the grading group. And then we can start to establish. We're going to do a grade to distance, and we're going to create that. We'll select this feature line. We'll pick the grading side over in this direction, and yes, we'll apply it to the entire length. We'll go for 150 meters at a grade of 2.4%. And what this effectively does is it creates a new plane that doesn't just sit flat, it runs at negative 2.4% right here. Now that's all we needed our grading tools for. It's created a rough surface for us. That rough surface is our parking plane. Once we've got that, after 30 seconds, we can take this gutter line right here and we can start to assign elevations to it. Now, the handy thing to do before that is we're going to realize that in some of these directions, there is a lot of empty space between nodes. So we want to insert elevation points to make sure that our surface is as accurate as possible. Now these elevation points won't affect the XY geometry, but they will give us vertical deviations in the elevations. Now I can add these in one at a time, or you saw in the command line is where you find a lot of great tools when it comes to grading. I can establish incremental distances between these points of maybe, let's go 5 meters. And it's going to put an elevation point every 5 meters for me. Once I've done that, now I'm going to have a much more accurate surface. So I could use another tool up in the ribbon, elevations from surface. I'll select that. Instead of the existing ground, I'd like that parking plane. And then we'll select this object right here. Now, notice, again, we have options to select multiple in the command line. There's a lot of great, useful tools with grading that happen in that command line. Now, once we've done this, we may just need to go back to the grading tools and open up the grading creation tool. And the reason we have to do this is I would like to add an infill in here as opposed to taking this feature line and adding it to a surface as a break line. And I'll do it and then I'll explain why it's a little bit more beneficial, or maybe you'll see this as we go. Now, anytime we open up the grading creation tool, always left to right. Confirm your site, confirm your grading group. Notice that now we're grading in a different site. We're not in the parking plane anymore, we're grading in the parking site. And this is what sites are made for, is grading options, grading scenarios, or just separating out grading aspects that might overlap a little bit that you don't want to interact. So if you're interacting with feature lines and grading objects in one site, they will not communicate with feature lines and grading options or grading objects from a different site. That's why it's very important to separate things out via different sites. Now, and that's why we've got the parking plane, or this temporary surface that was created from grading tools in the parking plane site. There's a lot more that we're going to explore with sites, but for right now, we're going to working left to right. I don't need this grading to distance or anything like that. I just want to add an infill. And now that I'm in the site that this feature line's in, it absolutely recognizes it as an outer boundary, and I'll click, enter, and this will apply a surface inside of this boundary, inside of this feature line only. Now the alternative to this would have been taking that feature line, adding it to the surface as a break line, and then adding a boundary as well. So we saved a step by using an infill. Now the next problem here, or the next portion of this plan, is we've got two tie-in points. We've got one at the bottom and one at the north side or the top. And this needs to tie into the existing, and so does the bottom. So let's use the next tool in our repertoire here, the little lightning bolt up in the top corner for editing elevations, the quick elevation editor. I love this tool because, as the name suggests, it is that quick. We can come in, select a point of intersection, a PI, or an elevation point, those little circles, and in the command line, it gives us options to edit that elevation. Now I can specify an elevation, or I can pick from a surface, and actually I'll select that surface because I want to make sure that it is this existing ground. Click OK. It suggests a new elevation for me, and I'll just hit enter to accept that. And notice that the surface will update as it goes, because this surface is set to rebuild automatically. Now I can adjust grades if I needed to, or I'll keep doing these elevations to make sure that this ties into existing. Surface, enter, enter. We'll do one more time just down at the bottom. I like to separate out areas that I've adjusted by exiting out of the command and then getting back in, so that if I do an undo, it will only undo that portion of the grading instead of all of the grading that I did just then and there. So I'll take from a surface, enter. Take from a surface, okay. And one more time from the surface, enter. And these look like relatively okay grades with this contours. We could even that out a little bit more, but the real issue looks to be up here. We've got a lot of steep contours in here, which leads us to our next option for editing the grades. We've got an amazing tool right here, set grade or slope between points. Now, I haven't seen too many people use this. I hope people use this. We've also got a newer version of this in Civil 3D 2021 that allows you to set that across multiple feature lines. But what we're going to do is set a consistent grade from this point, and again, accepting the elevation. And watch as I shade across each one of these points here. It's going to highlight them, and I'll select to go to here. It gives me a suggested grade, and I'll accept that grade. And when I exit out of the command, it's going to update those grades for me. So already with just a couple different buttons, we've already established some pretty useful grades across this. Now, all of these, 1, 2, and 3, already have very tight intervals of elevation points added to them. I would like to add the elevations from the temporary surface or from the parking surface to these. So again, I'll select one of them. I'll use the elevations from surface. I'll pick the parking surface and click OK. Now remember, we get even more options in the middle. I would have had to do this 3 times if I didn't say multiple right here. And then I can select 1, 2, and 3 and apply the grades from this parking surface to all 3 of them at the same time. Now notice that this one isn't actually on a site. In fact, none of these 3 are. So we'll select these and we'll have to move them to the site that the infill is on, so the parking site, for them to interact with the infill. Click OK. And now they're in that site. We may have to rebuild the surface just to prompt that. And you can see the triangulation now affects or is interacting with these 3 flow lines. Now, I don't want all of my water just sloping to the bottom of the site. I'd like about half of it to slope to the north of the site as well. So we'll use the next tool in our repertoire here. If I grab one of these feature lines, again, a lot of the great feature lines are up in the command line. We're going to do adjust elevations by reference. And what I can do here is I'll select that, and with this one as my base selection, it says select object to edit. So we'll select this north line right here, and it establishes all of the elevations, and we're going to adjust those elevations by a grade of -2%. What that'll do is it'll drop all of those elevations based on that and a referenced object right here. We'll click OK. Now, don't freak out if things disappear. Unfortunately, the infill is still a little bit glitchy sometimes, so we'll just have to apply that infill one more time. We'll add that back in, and you can see that it's updated the contours and actually started to split the grading on the site. Now, we're left with a low point right here, but we can fix that with a command that we've already used. This right here, set grade and slope between points. So we're going to do that, but this time we're going to come all the way out to this center line right here to effectively split the grading for the entire site. We'll click OK. We'll take this same starting point, enter, and we'll carry along, and you can see that it's highlighting all of the ones as I hover over top of them to right here, and it's suggesting 2.04%. Sounds great. We'll click OK and update the grades here. Now, there's obviously some finagling that needs to happen right here, and we can fix some of that, but at this point we've got the majority of a site graded pretty darn quickly within about 10 to 15 minutes. Now, as we start to build this out, I'm going to need the back of curb and the top of curb and things like that. And I can use my stepped offsets, but those are going to be slow. It's going to create one at a time. This is where the power of some of the Sim Project Suite comes in with AutoGrader. What AutoGrader is able to do, if I open it up, is we create grading families. And these grading families can be applied to a section of feature lines, or a number of feature lines at the same time. So this is a very simplistic scenario, but we'll take a look at one more where you can start to see the power of this as it applies to multiple feature lines. When I open up AutoGrader, we create a grading family. And if I dive into this grading family, we can see that we've got a top of curb and a back of curb established here, and those correspond with this little preview down at the bottom. And we're basically creating how we'd like those stepped offsets to happen. So we want this to have a stepped offset from that parent feature line, and the parent feature line is the baseline feature line, in this case the red gutter line right here. Then we establish the relationship to that parent feature line, or that baseline feature line that we're creating these stepped offsets from. We set the side, and then we actually apply the values. And we have control over these, so we can actually set the style, the layer, and the site that these newly created feature lines will sit on top of, or sit inside of. I'll save and close. And once you've created one of these, let's run it. And you can see that it creates these stepped offsets. Now, on top of this, if we like this grading scenario, we could even save this out to share it to other projects. So we can share this simple grading scenario right here, and it saves to a JSON file. And in fact, I had done that already here, so that's the barrier curb that we're saving out. I'll hit cancel, close, and this has started to create a back of curb and a top of curb right here, and it's also added it to the surface for me. Now, I could have done this just a little bit slower with stepped offsets, because I would have had to do 2 stepped offsets instead of 1. But if I move to a different grading scenario here, I want to take a look at a slightly different setup surface, where we've just used a number of feature lines to do this. So it doesn't need to be grading objects, it could just be feature lines. And I'll hide these. Now what we've also done is we've got a number of different islands in here. Well, we can apply the AutoGrader grading family to all of those islands at the same time. As I scroll down here, we can find I've got a number more grading families in here, but I can take this building site curb, and if we take a look at this, this is now a full curb and gutter. We've got the lip of curb out the one side, the parent would be the red line, so the gutter line of the curb, and we've established all of this, and better yet, we've actually selected 6 feature lines that we're going to apply these 3 stepped offsets to all at once. We've got the formatting options again, so we'll save and close and click run. And as we do this, it's also going to add it to a surface as break lines. There we go. Clicking run, you can see that all of these stepped offsets happen at the exact same time. So we applied 3 stepped offsets to 6 different feature lines. That saved us a ton of time. Better yet, if we decide that, let's go up top here, we needed maybe more of a knuckle out this way. I can take the baseline feature line that all of that was established off of, or the parent feature line as we call it, and drag this out a little bit more. Now, all of a sudden, all of these ones are out of date. We can go back into AutoGrader and it's kind of, I call it semi-dynamic because we're able to rerun that grading scenario right here. And it's going to reestablish the relationship between that parent feature line and all of the additional feature lines that it's created, or the child feature lines. We can create this for not only kind of parking and curbs and stuff like that, but how about ponds, like pond grading? You can establish a top of pond or a base of pond, your base level of the pond, and we can start to establish the different slopes and the different benchings that need to happen inside of our pond. Again, either grabbing a parent feature line or a baseline feature line from a filtering option or from selecting in the drawing. And the filtering options, if you hit the ellipse, it opens up a little filter option right here, a dialog that we're able to, if I didn't know what the layer was or what the name was or the style, I can actually just pick that right from the drawing and say that this right here is my pond. It populates the layer, we'll click OK, and then we'll click Run and see what happens. And it's going to establish all of those grades. Now if I've got that off to the side and I see it's not exactly what I wanted, maybe this needs to come in 0.25. That benching wasn't quite right. Maybe this only needs to come in at 1.5. We can adjust some of these, rerun the grading scenario, and it'll reestablish this for us. And we can edit things on the fly. As our grading scenarios get a little more complicated than this, with multiple tie-in points, with a lot more islands and things like that, AutoGrader is going to save us a ton of time with iterations. And as our grading changes, as we want to try different things with the rough grading, well, we can change the rough grading, then we can reapply that rough grading elevations to these baseline feature lines across here. If I select similar, we can apply it to these 6 feature lines again, and then reestablish the curbs by running the grading families from AutoGrader. So AutoGrader can get you about 80 to 90% there with your grading. What I'd like to do though is talk about kind of another piece of native tools that really dovetails nicely with these AutoGrader tools. Let's flip back to the PowerPoint over here, and I'd like to talk about drop curbs. Now, I'm sure there's multiple ways to do drop curbs, but I'm going to show you how to do it with feature lines and how we can establish these drop curbs using, again, another utility inside of sites, or with feature lines inside of sites. It's called split point resolution. And if I flip back to Civil 3D real quickly, I'm going to jump to my last of the 3 drawings right here. And we're going to zoom in. So I've got a building here, and I've got a laneway that needs to come out, or a walkway that needs to come out, and I need to have a drop curb right there. What feature line hierarchies, or this split point resolution, allows me to do is I can determine if all of my feature lines are in the same site. I can determine, or I can establish, which one takes priority at an intersection point. And the way to do this, in my Prospector tab, I'll go through Sites, my building site, and I can go look at all of the feature lines. So I've got a number of them in here, and if I right-click and go to Properties, I've got my feature line properties for that site. So I can see the number of feature lines in it, 37, some of the group statistics, but under the options, this is where I get to control how all of these feature lines interact. So this is saying that my existing, so my tie-in to existing, if that ever meets a parent feature line, which is in this case my right-of-way lines, if that ever meets one of those, it's the tie-in to existing that's going to dictate that intersection point. So we can use this feature line hierarchy, as I call it, or the split point resolution, to help determine where our drop curbs are. I'll click OK. I've got 2 edges of the laneway that I have on a drop curb style. And then I've got 2 other little pieces that are sitting on a drop curb tie-in style. There's nothing fancy about these styles. They just have to be two different styles that aren't being used in other places. But now that I've established that, once I open up AutoGrader, I'm going to rerun AutoGrader to get all of my, actually, I'll zoom out a little bit. We'll rerun AutoGrader to get all of my curb layout or my curb setup here again. So I'll run this grading scenario, and it's going to put child feature lines in this site. So the green ones are child feature lines. I'll close, and sometimes you need to hit the rebuild button, but if you look at what's happening here, this feature line, the longer feature line, isn't conforming to these stepped offsets because it has a style that's sitting higher than everything else. REA, or we may just need to go to the surface and rebuild that building FG surface. There we are. And if I zoom in here, I've got a couple different styles. And if let's go to my site, so building site, feature lines, right click into the properties, and we can take a look at this. And in fact, we can actually filter unused styles. We've got the platform edge. That's what the building is sitting on. We've got the drop curbs. So anytime that drop curb intersects, or the laneway intersects the building dictates that intersection point. But anytime this drop curb style intersects parent or basic, both of which are the ones that were used by AutoGrader, it's going to establish those intersection points. And then the tie-in, the drop curb tie-in, is just going to conform to everything else. What this does is it provides a point of elevation, or a vertical point of intersection that allows a kink in the line right beside it at a specified distance. Using this feature line hierarchy, we can get a lot more intricate design, a little bit smarter, and we can get these drop curbs done a lot quicker. But more than just drop curbs, we could use this for swales, or rear yard swales, or rear yard ditches that need to happen in residential grading. There's tons and tons of different scenarios where knowing about and being able to use this feature line hierarchy to dictate the elevations is going to be very handy to control and update more intricate designs with your grading projects. So I'll flip back to Civil 3D, or the PowerPoint rather, and just kind of summarize what we've talked about today. So at the very start we talked about, we want to stay organized. We want to put informative object names. We want to put descriptions in there to make sure that anyone could walk into our design and be able to continue it forward. We want to plan first. We want to plan out with a rough grading or with a temporary surface or a setup surface to plan out our grading first as to where you'd like water to flow on your site. Then we'll grade in a little bit more detail. We want to think about things in terms of components. So I didn't dive into this concept today, but in a site plan, you're going to have parking areas, you're going to have ponds, you're going to have green site areas, and you want to make sure that you're building each of these small components out and then add everything together. We want to make sure that we're using effective, efficient components when we're talking about grading, so feature lines and grading tools and things that'll update automatically for us. And then we'll tie it all together at the end. And I didn't really mention this too much, but we really want to make sure that we're keeping our grading scenarios separate. You'll notice that your grading or your project grading is going to make your drawings a lot larger. So it's recommended, or I would recommend, that you build out all of your grading scenarios in a separate drawing and then data shortcut that into the rest of your project design. With all of these concepts in mind, I hope you found this webinar useful. At this point, I'd like to turn things back over to Ramil to wrap things up.
Great. Thank you, Colin. I'm just going to flip screens here. The floor is now open for your questions. So please go ahead and type those in. at the Q&A icon below. Just a note, our next session is on August 17th for earthwork calculations using the highly requested tool to help develop earthwork processor. It will allow you to calculate your complex site earthworks using dynamic civil 3D surfaces. And as your design changes, by simply refreshing earthwork sets, everything will be automatically updated. Your results can be labeled, shaded, inserted in AutoCAD tables, and exported to Excel. These tools, much like all our other tools, will save you time by automating repetitive tasks. Now, please let us know if a dedicated orientation would be ideal to showcase all of our SolidCAD workflow tools. Just contact myself or Colin or connect with your account rep. We can conduct a session with your entire CAD team and find solutions that pertain to your specific projects. So I don't see any questions coming in. With that, I would like to thank you once again. We'll see you soon and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, folks.